Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Police Off the Cuff Real Crime Stories. I'm your host, retired NYPD Sergeant Bill Cannon, a 27-year veteran of the NYPD. You know, new information keeps coming out, of course, in the Bryan Koberger case. And in this case, of course, we are looking at new evidence that came up from his apartment, his place, his space that he lived. Um, Very eerie, very dark, sort of shows a lot about his personality and about the way he lived. What does it say when you just have a very sparsely decorated, if you could call it decorated at all? It looks almost Spartan. That's probably a good word for it. A bed, no pictures on the wall, no decor, no signs that the person that lives here is a person of substance, a person that lives out in the world, a person that has something more to their personality than these bare walls and this empty television set and this lamp sitting on a stool. I mean, does that not tell you something about this individual, Bryan Koberger? What does it tell us about him? What does it say about this man? And I think probably if there are people out there, of course, that read body language. I wonder if there's people out there that can tell us what this means. The bare walls of an apartment of a mass killer. Does that give us a heads up about something? About things that you see or don't see inside his abode? I think it does. I think it absolutely does. So, folks, hold on to your hats. Hold on to your loved ones. You're about to enter true crime from a police perspective. You're about to enter the off-the-cuff zone, the police off-the-cuff zone.
There has to be some common sense.
They were the ones who called 911 to get him help, and now they're calling for change.
And now a word from our sponsor. FanDuel is a new sponsor of the Police Off the Cuff podcast on the Believe Network. And as you guys know, you can bet on something called Sportsbook. FanDuel allows you to bet on the NFL, Major League Baseball, hockey, the NBA, all of those things. And as no one will be surprised of, Thursday night is opening night for the NFL season. I know people have been going through football withdrawals since the Super Bowl. And the Philadelphia Eagles will host the Dallas Cowboys, the Super Bowl champion Philadelphia Eagles. So you can, if you would like, place bets on those games through FanDuel. FanDuel, the new sponsor of the Police Off the Cuff podcast. So, yes, this information that we have about Bryan Koberger, these pictures, creepy new evidence photos have revealed the inside of Bryan Koberger's apartment, soulless and abandoned from when he upped sticks and left Washington after murdering 4 University of Idaho students. And this is according to the Daily Mail. Idaho State Police released a new batch of 699 evidence photos, many of them taken inside the Washington State University housing in Pullman that the criminology PhD student called home. The images captured desolate shelves, bare cupboards, and coat hangers hanging in near-empty closets inside the one-bedroom apartment. There are no pictures or posters on the walls, no photos of family or friends, and few personal touches typical of a student home. Instead, there are a handful uh, of belongings that reveal anyone has been living there in recent months, including a stash of Koberger's criminology textbooks and 2 mystery birthday cards the killer received less than 2 weeks after the murders. His motive is unclear. People have said that his motive for killing these 4 young students is unknown. However, we're going to visit one of the shows that we did on it, and we, as well as some other content creators on YouTube, stated that the motive was psychosexual in nature. And we had retired FBI agent Jim Clemente, who I'm going to play a little bit later on, to sort of drive that theory home. Dr. Gary Braccato was on the interview room, and he suggested the same thing, that it was psychosexual related. That was the motive. And then, of course, we also had Dr. Joni Johnson agree with our assessment. And she is a forensic psychologist from California. So all of that information, when people say there's no clear motive, I don't know if that in fact is true. We did a whole show on that, and I'm not going to dwell upon it. I'll play a little bit of that show later on. But I think the motive was clear. And this is from News Nation, looking at some of Bryan Koberger's photos and the evidence revealed and what this reveals about his apartment in Pullman.
Crime scene photos come after Koberger pled guilty just 2 months ago to the quadruple homicides known as the Idaho 4. Criminal justice books were also found in Koberger's residence, and that doesn't come as much of a surprise since we know he was working on getting his PhD in criminology. But what is stunning here is a book on sexual victimization of women on college campuses. We still don't know his motives for killing Kaylee Gonzalez, Maddie Mogan, Xana Kernodle, and Ethan Chapin. But the more photos are released of his personal quarters, it does raise suspicion of why he targeted the young women specifically in their college house. Joining me now, News Nation's Bryan Enton on the development, who, as you know, has been following this so closely. All right, Bryan, what stood out to you in the photos? I mean, when I first opened the file, it's close to 700 pictures. It was a lot to get through.
Yeah, I think it's 699 photos. What stood out to me the most were the photos inside his apartment, which is in Pullman, Washington, where he was going to Washington State University to get his PhD in criminology. And if we kind of cycle through some of the photos here, we've never seen inside the apartment up until now. You can see it's very barren. Kind of depressing looking. This is the living room. You can see he's got like a TV stand. What's interesting is on the TV stand, though, are these greeting cards that are apparently from family members. It was his birthday, and these greeting cards came after the murders, which is sort of strange to think about. Here, someone refers to him as Bryan. And then this seems to be a card from his mom that says, "A son never leaves your home, leaves your home, but you never leaves your heart." So there were greeting cards there. This is also the kitchen. Everything was very, very clean for the most part. The bathroom, remember the just creepy selfie that he took Laura after the murders. There were some hairs they found in the apartment that I had heard about, which this backs up. They have evidence markers showing the hairs. This is the bedroom here. Laura, again, just very barren. He has a computer there. And there's actually another hair that they found. I think it was on his bedspread. There it is right there. You can see another evidence marker. These hairs never ended up actually connecting back to the murders. You'll remember they found very little in his apartment in terms of anything that connected back to the murders. This is his office at Washington State University in the basement of the Criminal Justice Building. I'd never seen inside before. There's just a desk. You showed photos of the whiteboard. And I was just thinking back, there were these police reports. Many of his colleagues that he worked with at WSU said that they were creeped out even going in his office because they found him to be so creepy. Remember, he made fellow students cry. And then there's the whiteboard again. There's something that they blacked out on the whiteboard, which kind of left me wondering what that was. But again, this is our first look into his home, and then also into his office there at the university. Laura?
Why do we think that they released those photos now? I mean, obviously it's been coming down kind of in this trickle effect, but there were a lot of these photos, and they just kind of popped up on the Idaho Police website without warning, so to speak.
I think, the analysis of this is quite interesting. Like what, and in no way am I qualified to say what a bedroom like this says about the person that lives there, or the living room with absolutely no pictures, barren walls, a lamp on a stool, but otherwise no signs of personality, no signs of the person that lives there, although these shout out that this person is perhaps a loner, doesn't have many friends, is somewhat disconnected. I think if these pictures say anything, that's what it would say. Look at the walls in this location. Look at the way this apartment looks. And I'll go back to the recording from News Nation, and it, I believe, shouts out a lot about the person that lives here, Bryan
Yeah,
Koberger.
that's kind of the way it's been working. It's been hard to track when things get released because they sort of just post them. They've created a public website. There's the greeting card again, by the way. A public website for Idaho State Police and also for the local police, Moscow Police. And I guess just as these things get approved, they post and release them. We've released pretty much everything. So yeah, it's just sort of been trickling out. And you mentioned, I mean, this time it was 699 photos.
Yeah, and the other thing that stood out to me too, Brian, looking around all of the rooms, every single room, there's not one picture. There's not one knickknack. There's no, I mean, it is so barren. It looks like either he just
Don't pictures and decorations and signs of humanity in someone's abode, their home, their apartment, doesn't it say something about that individual? Well, does the lack of those things also say something about the individual? That there's no decorations, there's no pictures on the wall, there's no signs of any personality of the person that lives there.
moved in or he was just about to move out, but apparently it was neither. But when we take a look at these, one of the other things that I wanted to ask you about when I was going through the photos, I don't know if we have it to show, but it sounded like this. So there were these pictures of these rocks, like a rock path that might have been going maybe to his apartment that had little blood droplets. We don't have the photos to show, but it sounds like they found out that it wasn't connected.
Yeah, that's right. There were some photos from like a walking path, some stone steps where there looked like a spot of blood. That was apparently not connected. It was just something that they looked into as part of the investigation. There's a black glove, by the way, that they found in his closet. Also didn't seem to be connected. Some closet pictures here. One other thing that I was just going through is they also took pictures of all of his research papers, Laura, which is really disturbing. I mean, he did in-depth research papers about getting into the mind of criminals, about the death penalty, about small town policing, things that now we know, that he admitted to these murders. And just, I think back to seeing him in court and you forget just how well he understood the whole legal process. I mean, in a sense, he really was an expert. I mean, he wrote these very, very detailed research papers on even the court process, on different plea deals. So he really knew what was going on.
Thank you for watching. Subscribe below and download.
Wasn't able to get there quick enough to keep Andrew off. Excuse me, Chris Cuomo, not Andrew. Andrew's the one running for New York City mayor. So yeah, I think that these pictures, they do tell a lot about the individual that lives there, And when Bryan Enton was speaking about Bryan Koberger's papers and his books, of course, he's going to write papers about creepy things. He was a criminology student. What would you expect him to write about? About a couple of months ago, we had Jim Clemente on, the retired FBI agent who was probably one of the best profilers in the country. And we had him on the show and we were talking about motive in this case. And you always hear the news media say they still haven't found a motive, but we believe that we did find a motive. We believed and we shared that information with numerous people and some experts. And of course, Jim Clemente was one of those experts who we spoke to about this. This is part of that show where Jim speaks about it.
The fact that His phone was turned off just during the amount of time it took for him to leave his house, get to the crime scene, commit the crime, and go back to his house. Then his phone comes back on. It's the lack of something that actually screams out that he turned his phone off as a forensic countermeasure. Now,
So when he says the lack of something, couldn't that also be true with the sparsity of pictures and humanity inside his apartment? Consistency, right? With who and what this person is.
he thought I'm slick by doing this, but if he didn't do that, if he had left it on, and and if he was smart, if he put it in some other location, then it would have actually helped his case. In this case, it hurt him.
Yeah, I think that's great, and you think that way because you're an investigator, you're a former FBI agent, and you realize, wow, that is very strong circumstantial evidence, like
Yeah.
I do. But when people hear about that, oh, what does that mean? That's nothing. It's just and if they don't see it on paper, like an arrest affidavit or a brief or something like that, then it didn't happen. And I told them, when this case goes to trial, you're going to see evidence come out of the woodwork that you had
Right.
no idea even existed.
Right, because, basically the paperwork that leads to a trial, the stuff that they're able to read, the affidavits and the filings, all that stuff is a summary. The witnesses, when they get on the stand, they're going to have a tremendous amount of experiential information that they didn't write down, but that tells the story so much better than how one affidavit. An affidavit is just trying to show probable cause. It's not trying to prove beyond a reasonable doubt. You don't have to put everything in there. So anyway, yeah,
Exactly.
circumstantial evidence is incredibly powerful. Yeah, you can't just go by one little piece of it, but direct evidence, like the sheath that he purchased with his thumbprint on it, with his DNA on it, that's direct evidence. It's not circumstantial evidence. That is direct evidence that he had the weapon that was used to kill these people, that he left it there, that he purchased it. That's direct evidence that he is the killer. The crap that he tried to pull, that his lawyers tried to pull, where they were trying to say, well, I have standing to say that evidence shouldn't be admissible, but I don't own it. It's not mine. I mean, it's just so ridiculous.
Right, it
I
doesn't
mean,
make any sense.
if you're going to admit that it's yours, then you have standing to say, look, you can't put it in because it wasn't abandoned property or whatever, but just by admitting, just by trying to argue that you have standing to try to get that piece of evidence thrown out, just it's a tacit admission that you left it there. Well, that's right, you did, and that proves the case against you. It doesn't help you in any way.
Absolutely. I want to go to someone in the chat. GG4JK, is there any evidence that
Don't use his name. Stop using his name. If you
Okay,
want to
is there
write
any
to
evidence-
us, if you want us to answer questions, drop that asshole's name,
Okay,
please.
we won't use. Is there any
I'm
evidence that the
talking to
perpetrator-
the other people. So just say, is there any evidence that he had knowledge that the patio door would be unlocked? He actually tried to break in before November 13th. Had he actually tried? Well, I mean, he may have seen people.
So this is amazing. This is, of course, Jim Clemente, and we've introduced him before as to who he is, how he is this FBI profiling genius, and the evidence that so many people that followed this case just discounted this evidence as if it wasn't important. And we spoke about how important circumstantial evidence is. And, there he is. He left the knife sheath there. He left his thumbprint on the knife sheath. He left his DNA on the knife sheath, and it belongs to him. Yet I can't tell you how many people have sent me messages that he didn't do it. He's innocent. He didn't act alone. And to me, it's ridiculous. It's absolutely ridiculous that someone can say this, that he's not the perpetrator. Well, we know, of course, now, innocent people don't plead guilty and get sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. So if you don't believe now, that this guy here, BK, is the guy, then I think you're not getting it. You're really not getting it. I'm going to go back to Jim Clemente for a quick other minute.
And it wasn't just, his phone and his Ring cameras that did him in. There were so many things. And of course, it is circumstantial evidence, but it is an overwhelming amount of circumstantial evidence. And there's no question that this guy thought more of himself than he could actually achieve.
Absolutely. Smitty from the chat. Sergeant, thank you for the $5 super sticker. Sergeant Bill, why do you keep with the belief he will give an allocution? Well, that was the door for that was just shut. Apparently, he cannot give an allocution at the sentencing hearing.
Well, it's not an allocution anymore. The allocution goes with the plea, right? And the judge didn't ask him for an allocution. And I don't know why. I could be wrong. I don't know the state law there, but the time for an allocution is at the time of the plea. But I believe prior to sentencing, they will give an opportunity to make a statement. And of course, he could say whatever the hell he wants. If he says something really bad, they might shut him down. But it's certainly not in his interest to make any further statements about his culpability at sentencing, because that's only going to hurt him at sentencing. If he goes off on, I walked in there and I did X, Y, and Z to this person, and then I did this, and then I did that, and then I did that, and this is the reason why, the judge is going to say, you are a completely sick, deranged psychopath, and you should go away forever, period. So it's not going to help him.
So those are some of the things that Jim Clemente spoke about. And I just I think we have to also acknowledge that when we look at these pictures of his apartment, and we talked about how sparse it is and how almost doesn't look like a human being really lives there, But the other part was there was no evidence related to this quadruple murder that was recovered inside his apartment. What does that tell us? What does that tell us about how he prepared to get away with this, and how he got rid of the murder weapon, the clothing, and none of it got back into his apartment, which in the bloodiness of this crime scene, it's almost very difficult to believe that in fact occurred. This is from Law and Crime.
Disturbing.
Lots of flexing muscles, selfies, half clothed, like that. There's numerous instances of that on his phone.
I talked with the two investigators who pieced together Bryan Koberger's digital trail and the things he couldn't erase no matter how hard he tried.
Psychopathic paranoia and then studying serial killers into looking to get rid of his car. He was nervous.
Plus, we're seeing new video of Bryan Koberger returning home after committing the murders. Welcome to Crime Fix. I'm Anjanette Levy. Bryan Koberger, he believed he had thought of everything. Xana Kernodle and Ethan Chapin last month. Koberger is now serving 4 consecutive life sentences for the brutal killings. Koberger was a criminology major at Washington State University, so he was studying crime and serial killers. One serial killer we've told you about that Koberger was studying, Ted Bundy, who attended college in Washington, but then killed women in several states, including Utah, Colorado, and Florida. Bundy was caught after murdering sorority sisters in Tallahassee. But the Barnharts say that Bryan Koberger was obsessed with other serial killers. When the Barnharts started digging, they found that Bryan Koberger was searching for serial killer Harvey Glattman. He was a rapist in the 1950s who is known as the Lonely Hearts Killer. He also was called the Glamour Girl Slayer. Another was Robert Hansen, who kidnapped, raped, and murdered at least 17 women in Alaska in the 1970s and 1980s. Koberger also searched for Tommy Lynn Sells, who was known as the Coast to Coast Killer and is believed to be responsible for more than 22 murders. But one of Koberger's searches really jumped out at the Barnharts. That search was for a man whose name isn't as widely known as, say, Ted Bundy. Danny Rolling was dubbed the Gainesville Ripper after he murdered 4 female college students and a male student in August of 1990. Rolling broke into the apartments of the college students dressed in all black, wearing a mask. He sexually assaulted 2 women in one apartment and stabbed them with a K-bar knife. He also entered the homes of one of his victims through a sliding glass door. Does this sound familiar? This sounds a lot.
So, very scary when you have here an aspiring, let's call BK here, an aspiring serial killer, became a mass murderer, never got to do an additional murder that would have made him a serial killer. But is that also not circumstantial evidence? The fact that he was studying other serial killers and specifically rapists, doesn't that mean something evidence-wise? Had he gone to trial, wouldn't that have said to us that he is studying? He is studying this information so that he could better perform during his attacks. Very disturbing. This is the Barnharts on the show. They did the cell phone work, the digital searches on BK's cell phone.
For coming on to talk with us about your work on the Idaho case.
Thank you for having us.
Heather, I'll start with you. When were you first approached about working on this case?
It was late spring of 2023 when the FBI reached out, seeing if I was interested in assisting.
Mm-hmm. And then, Heather, do you reach out to Jared and say, or do you go back to the FBI and say, I think Jared, he should be, working on the case too, or how does that work?
Well, I casually asked them, would you prefer 4 sets of eyes versus 2? And it was a laptop and a phone. So having us divide and conquer, I thought could be really helpful. And they said, absolutely, come in. And that's how it all started.
So Jared, where do you guys go from there?
So we went into the FBI office and just sort of got a little bit of a pulse of where the investigation was, some of the digital evidence that they had. And I mean, from there, you really have to take a slow look at which devices had they extracted data from. We had one Android phone and then a computer, and then understanding, what they had already done. Like they had already spent time and effort in looking at this evidence and then seeing where our expertise sort of fit and what we might be able to dig for.
So they were amazing. And some of the things that the digital evidence told us, was that when he turned his cell phone off, he was heading to do the murders. And that was at about 2:30 in the morning. And then when he turned it back on, the murders had been completed and he was heading back towards Pullman. So that screams out at you as tremendous circumstantial evidence. And I'm trying to point this out all the time as to how powerful circumstantial evidence is. Folks, FanDuel is the new sponsor for the Police Off the Cuff podcast on the Believe Network. And you can place bets on FanDuel this Thursday night, opening night of the NFL season. And we're all looking forward to that. So, folks, I want to thank you for tuning in to this afternoon. This is so interesting, all the new information that's coming out. I'm Bill Cannon from Police Off the Cuff, Real Crime Stories. Thank you so much for tuning in. Have a great day, and God bless everyone.